Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lord Michael Hastings, Chancellor at Regent's University London, Nicholas Logothetis, Concordia's co-founder and chairman, John Negroponte, Vice Chairman at McLarty Associates, and Álvaro Uribe Vélez, former President of the Republic of Colombia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Logothetis, Chairman of Concordia. We're nearly there, nearly to the end of the second day. Thanks for sticking with us. Lord Hastings, can you hear us okay?
I can hear you. Good afternoon.
You look like you're in a very beautiful place, wherever that is.
I'm in California right now.
All right, there you go. So we're here today with our good friends, President Uribe, Ambassador Negroponte, and Lord Hastings, all of whom serve on our leadership council to talk about leadership in crisis. And I think, it's a topic that is always important. I'll always remember the advice of one of your fellow leadership council members, General Petraeus, who says something very simple to us, but very profound in many ways. And he says, leadership counts. And what that means is that, in times of crisis, being present, being out there, taking quick decisions that don't impact, with no sort of pre-thought for yourself is critical. And President Uribe, you became president of Colombia in 2002. And by the time, and the country was not in a good situation, let's say. And by the time you left in 2010, it was a completely reformed country, safe, secure, an investment. If anyone has not read President Uribe's book, No Lost Causes, I strongly recommend it. It's in Spanish and English. It's one of the best books I've ever read. There's some, the opening chapter is at his inauguration, I believe, where he's told we basically have no money, we have no, the militants are shelling the palace, what do we do? And so it's definitely worth a read. So, President Uribe, what is important for a leader in a crisis? What is the key elements of being successful in crisis?
Thank you. It's a great honor to be here with you, Nicholas, with Ambassador Negroponte, and with Lord Hastings. Thank you to everyone. My presidential candidacy was very controversial because for the first time someone in Colombia was proposing security for all people as a fundamental of any new government. Therefore, leadership in moments of crisis, leaders have to accept, to promote, to intervene in controversy. These were not the times for going easily. These were the times for going with all the hardships, with all the difficulties. I said to my fellow Colombians, we have violence, less private investment, much more poverty. This is a vicious cycle. We have to turn it into a virtue cycle. More security, more private investment, less poverty. And we advance in all these three pillars. The proposal was to create confidence in Colombia, within the domestic and within the international community. Because I asked to myself, Colombia had in Latin America the best macroeconomic management in the last century. Never defaulted, never hyperinflation, was very well managed, our economy. However, at the beginning of my administration, there were more than 4 million Colombians overseas. They had fled the country. I did not convert the country in a paradise, did not convert the country into a paradise, but we made significant improvement. One very important element, to lead by the example. To lead by example. And for me, it was much more important for the people in Colombia to realize that the government was working with all the dedication, that the government was interested in producing positive outcomes. I was asked, and this is my final point on this, in this segment, I was asked many times, Mr. President, how long do you need for Colombia to become a peaceful country? And my answer was, I cannot give you this promise, but my promise is that you will see me working day and night with all dedication. And one very important point was that we work for short-term victories. In the middle of the road, some small victories for people to recover the faith, the confidence in the country.
Yeah. Well, that's, certainly you led by example. I didn't know you when you were president, but having read your book and spoken to those who did, it certainly was your motto and your MO. Ambassador, you've served as the U.S. ambassador in a number of countries. You've served as the first director of national intelligence, deputy secretary of state, ambassador to the UN, and a number of international crises. You were in government during 9/11. What did those years teach you about leadership in crisis? What are the most important traits a leader can possess when faced with these global challenges?
Yeah, thank you, Nick. And let me just say, President Uribe, I met you when you were president-elect, and I think you'd just been recently elected, and we had a chance to get together in New York at the United Nations. And I just want you to know how greatly I admire the way you carried out your mission during your years as president. And I totally agree with you that a leader has to be, can't ask other people to make sacrifices that he or she is not willing to make. So I think that's extremely important. I think I have three characteristics that I want to mention, Nick. The first is clear and effective communication. And rather than going back to the 9/11 example, let me just cite two historical ones and one contemporary one. The historical ones are Lincoln and Roosevelt. And who hasn't read Abraham Lincoln's speeches? There's a reason for that. The man was self-taught. He barely went to grammar school. But as he got older, he found somebody lent him a grammar book. I think he walked 20 miles to go and get it. And he focused on perfecting his grammar and developing a very simple, straightforward syntax, clear, declarative sentences, and that kind of approach permeated his speeches. And of course, all of us as school children here in the United States, we learned the Gettysburg Address and all the other great speeches he made. Franklin Roosevelt, well, who doesn't remember the incredible oratory of that extremely courageous man? And if no other line, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. Probably one of the most famous of his statements. And of course, today we've got President Zelenskyy in Ukraine, who I think is, it goes without saying, he's setting an incredible example of leadership. Second point I would make is take your own counsel. You can't let your decisions depend exclusively on the advice of others. When you're president, you're president. Whatever path you took to get there. And I'm thinking of two examples to contrast. JFK, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Joint Chiefs of Staff wanted to bomb Cuba and invade it. And that was sort of the prevailing option on the table for a number of days during the beginning of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And President Kennedy reflected on it, and he finally said, no, I'm not going to do that. And he imposed the quarantine that ultimately led, the quarantine on Cuba, preventing ships from coming to Cuba, led to the negotiated resolution to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Lyndon Johnson, by contrast, and I worked as a junior diplomatic officer in both administrations in different kinds of jobs, but LBJ, he thought that just because he had John F. Kennedy's advisors, that whatever they recommended to him was okay. I mean, that's the sense I got when I was working on the Vietnam question. And he really never had any clear-cut sense of what he himself was doing to direct that war. And ultimately, that led to his failures in that realm. And the last point I'd make, Nick, is a leader has to set clear goals and boundaries for whatever action he is undertaking and his government is undertaking on behalf of the United States. George Herbert Walker Bush said, we're going to liberate Kuwait, but that's as far as we're going to go. We're not going to Baghdad to unseat Saddam Hussein. A lot of people said, why aren't you going to do that? And he said, I'm not. That's not what the Security Council resolution, UN Security Council resolution approved. And as far as President Biden is concerned, to come to the current situation, I think he set a clear negative goal, avoiding direct conflict with Russia, but I'm not sure that we yet have an entirely clear picture as to what outcome it is that he is prepared to accept.
Yeah. Lord Hastings, same question for you. I mean, you've had a career in business, in academia, worked with a lot of young people. What are some of the qualities that you see in aspiring leaders, as well as leaders that you've worked with?
Well, I think we're at a fascinating juncture in our misunderstanding of history. And it's very easy to quote the greats and to be captured by them, and we should. It's very uncomfortable to ask ourselves, how did we miss this ugly imposition of evil in Vladimir Putin when so many in the West cuddled up to him, including presidents of the United States and prime ministers of Great Britain and others who, to quote George Bush, who said, I've looked into the soul of this man and I can do business with him. And we are in a very difficult juncture where we thought that leadership was about being on a common page of a capital adventure. If we were all in it because there was oil and cash and money and gas, and we were all about the same market opportunities, then somehow we were all in the same common leadership pool. We've discovered that's not the case. And one of the great learnings about leadership must be that, as is often said, those who don't learn the lessons of history only learn how to repeat the same lessons they didn't learn before, as history keeps repeating itself. And if you go back to the Berlin Wall collapse, the people were saying back then, historians who understood the nature of the Russian Empire, that this was coming, and they predicted it. But of course, in the political class, we're short-term, or rather politicians are short-termists. So it goes in cycles of election where things become very domesticized. Make America great again forgets about how you make the world work again. And losing an agenda that actually holds the world together leads us to these disastrous places of discomfort we're in. I have two significant people I want to mention that I count as really big heroes of leadership. The first one is Kuan Yew. Kuan Yew was the man who took the swamp left behind at the end of the colonial period, the back end of Malaysia, this little swamp that was called Singapore, that was a British naval port, and took it from the 1950s now into being a top G20 economy, a small country of just 5.5 million people without a single natural asset to it, not a single river, not a mountain, no gold, no platinum, no oil, no gas, no natural asset to it other than incredibly intensely well-educated people, determined, very, very moral framework, crystal clear, corruption-free, essentially stabilized economy and a society built on learning and giving. And what Lee Kuan Yew did, and subsequently his sons who have led the government of Lee Kuan Yew, is to create a beacon in the middle of Asia, which is absolutely outstanding example of how to lead from the nothing upwards. And I think that's a very important thing. How do you get there when there's nothing around you to quantify that you've got excess and privilege, but to take that nothing and turn it into something of esteem? The other person I would mention is F.W. de Klerk, who just died a few months ago, the former president, the apartheid president of South Africa, the man who let Nelson Mandela out of prison. And the wonderful thing about F.W. de Klerk, who I met many, many times and enjoyed his company greatly, was that he came to be celebrated by black and white alike because he'd made a transformation from being an oppressor president into being a liberator president. And he did the most important thing that any leader can do, which is to realize that your role is not to be the one in control. He ceded leadership to Mandela, and then he became Mandela's vice president. He served. In other words, he took the low seat, the lowest place, and he gave the opportunity to move the levers of government in favor of the new black majority government under President Mandela. Those are distinguishing people whose significance goes way beyond domestic agendas, right out into world impacts. Let's just come back to Zelensky, who is an incredible man, whose statements that he's made to our House of Commons and House of Lords, that he's made also to the House of Representatives and to the Senate, that he's made to parliaments around the world, is a clarion call that we're misunderstanding the seriousness of what's going on. And we need to heed that, because when we're in comfort, we don't realize that history is repeating itself.
Thank you. Very wise words. And I've also had the pleasure of meeting Kuan Yew once and F.W. de Klerk, and I couldn't agree with you more. We don't have too much time left, so I want to just ask one very, very brief, let's call it a lightning round, question of everyone. We'll start with Lord Hastings, and the question is just very simple. What is the most important element of characteristic of a good leader? One or two characteristics.
So, I would say to let it go, be willing to let it go and to move on.
Okay. President Uribe, what is the most important one or two characteristics of a good leader?
To promote community involvement, permanent dialogue, and to get a balance in between vision and execution.
And I would say to communicate those elements effectively to your society, because without effective communication, no matter how good your ideas are, you're not going to be able to get it done.
Yeah, and I'll say in the last 30 seconds that we have that President Uribe was one of the first leaders to really embrace Twitter. And he has 5 million followers, and no, I'm serious. It's it's now everyone tweets, but he was one of the first. And so in today's world where misinformation and disinformation is rife, I think it's absolutely right. Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Lord Hastings. Enjoy California, and thank you, President Uribe and Ambassador Negroponte, and thank you to you all.
On time and on budget.